Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Levi-Four, and we are in the framework of what we call Ma'avarim in Hebrew, and transition is the literal translation in English. Ma'avarim or transition is about the professional development of PhD students, and this is more like a platform for other people, volunteers, to present their ideas and to contribute for a better academic world. Better academic world, both in the social meaning of academia and meaning how we treat each other, but also better research training. And today with us, Professor Amos Bouskila from the Ben-Gurion University in the Negev, the southern part of Israel, on how to increase your creativity in scientific writing. Amos did his first 2 degrees in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He was kind of practitioners, establishing the Israeli Reptile Information Center in Israel. Thereafter, he did his PhD in University of California, Davis, and a postdoc in Vancouver. He's doing game theory in the animal kingdom. So he's trying to understand, and I hope I'm interpreting your study or field right, is kind of a game theoretical approach to relation in the animal kingdom. Thank you very much, Amos, for volunteering to give this presentation. And the floor is yours. You can also correct my presentation of you. So I'm sure you can give more accurate information. Thank you, Amos.
No, everything is fine. Thank you. And thank you for managing this list. I think it's a very great and important, valuable resource to students and postdocs and whoever is planning their careers. Because I think that the crowd of people here that accumulated to this Ma'avarim is in a stage of transition, and definitely writing something is the tool to move on usually. Then I thought that it's suitable to present you this talk. I will start with a personal story. As you heard, I did my PhD at the University of California, and it's a wonderful place to be, really just also as a place to live, but also as a place to study, at least in my discipline, which was ecology. And here you see one of the buildings in which ecologists were housed. I used to sit in the 5th floor. And if you could look into the window during my last year of my studies, you could find me there. And yes, I was struggling. Now the question is, why was I struggling? I had a wonderful field study, fascinating results, and not only objectively, it's not only my objective judgment, but also my supervisor were very happy with the findings and the models that I wrote about them. I even had 1 chapter already written. So why was I struggling and suffering? The reason was that this 1 chapter, the chapter that I was so happy about, took me 4 months to write. And I knew that I had at least 2 more chapters to finish, and my fellowship wouldn't cover another 8 months. And I was really hysteric, you can say. And that just at that time, my wife, who was at that time working at a hospital in Sacramento, not far from Davis, came to me with a ticket she got for a workshop about creative writing. She said, 2 days workshop, why don't you take it? And I say, what, are you crazy? Do I have time to spare for 2 days, whole days, and homework and all this? But somehow I got convinced and I went to this workshop. And the result was that if my first chapter took me 4 months to write, the second chapter after this workshop took me 2 weeks, and the last chapter, not that it was shorter, but after I mastered this technique, took me one long weekend. You know, in the US, they have long weekends of 3 days from time to time. So this is what happened, one long weekend, and I completed this third chapter. And because I saw how useful this method is, I thought that it will be good to transfer it to you guys. And this is going to be the structure of my talk. First, I'm going to briefly touch about some theoretical bases that was presented during the workshop, and then some preliminary stages before you even start writing that you have to do them. Then the actual creative writing. And then I'll address either a right order of the different sections of whatever you're writing, and eventually preventing writer's block. When you look at this drawing made by Leonid Pasternak, he named it the passion of creation. However, if you are right now in the stage of struggling with writing something and you see the progress is not happening, maybe your interpretation for this picture is different. Maybe you don't see here the passion of creation, but you see the struggle of dragging the writing, and it can be quite struggling. So let's try and prevent it. So the theoretical basis that was suggested in this workshop, they started by saying, what do cognitive psychologists tell us? And I specifically wrote it in quotation mark because that's not really what cognitive psychologists think, at least not today. And even then, not all of them thought like that, but never mind, I'm going to describe what they said, and then I'll tell you what the current thought is about it. So they were talking about the left brain that is logical, rational, analytical, sequential, objective, and looks at parts. And then the right brain, creative, random, intuitive, holistic, synthesizing, subjective, looks at wholes. So this was the theory that they presented. Nowadays, and actually it's already been a few years that we know that this division has nothing to do with left brain and right brain. It was a myth that was already in the late 80s. It was discovered that there's no connection to these parts of the brain. However, you can still acknowledge that there are people who are more logic and other people who are more creative in their approach to whatever they're doing. This definitely is something true, only we shouldn't name it left brain and right brain, but let's call it logic thinking versus creative thinking. If I'm looking at this list, logical, rational, analytical, sequential, this is me. I'm looking and I'm thinking, wow, how did they know that this is how I'm living? And it's not only how I am living, this is how I was educated in high school and at the university, and this is how I educate my students also to be scientists. This is what I think, or I'm used to tell them that they have to be. Apart from that, there are the people who are more creative, and I have one very good friend. She's an artist, and she's exactly like this. She's thinking intuitively, holistic, synthesizing things. When she's talking to me about her way of viewing things, not to mention her art, I am lost completely. I say, where she got this? How does she think like this? I don't see, I cannot connect to her way of thinking. Fortunately, we're very good friends and for 35 years already, and this cannot make a problem of communication. But I acknowledge that there are people who think completely different, and what can we do? They are the creative people. So, writing with our logical thinking only is very limiting. While we think in a logical way, we usually follow a step by step, like climbing a ladder, and we go step by step, very clear pathway, not very fast, but we get to our goal, whatever that is. However, maybe we are missing out the opportunity to take off and fly by being so logical in the way of thinking. So this is the main idea of this workshop. to rely not only, yes, we are scientists, we have to work with our logical way of thinking, but not only with this, but we need to tap on our creativity. And we have to start with this creativity early. Early in the stage of writing. You cannot first process things in the logical way and then say, okay, now I'm going to give it a little paint of creativity. No, this is not going to work. You're going to see that if you are going to employ creativity, it has to be at the early stages, and then you apply the logical thinking. So let's see, what are we talking about? I mean, what kind of writing are we talking about? So depending on the stage where you are, you might have a research proposal that you have to submit. Maybe you have a thesis that you have to complete. Maybe you are beyond the thesis and you have articles that you have to write. All this is legitimate and very useful. This writing workshop can help you. But even if you write letters, speeches, or you have planned to write a book, everything goes. So within all these kind of writing, which part will benefit the most? I would say, if I'm talking now about thinking about a research article, then usually the introduction and the discussion are most complicated in terms of writing, and the options there are numerous, then this is the part that would benefit the most with this method. So imagine that we are now talking about writing, that our task is to write an introduction for some article or a chapter of our thesis, okay? So this is what our task is. And if we try to think, where are people likely to get stuck? So there are several options. Some people get stuck at the beginning. They don't know how to start, and they can dwell on this and like in a swamp for weeks or more than that. And even if they cross this obstacle, sometimes they don't know how to continue and they get stuck there. And even also, there are people who get stuck toward the end. How do you end this process? So options are many, and we're going to address all of them. And we will start with how to start. So there are several preliminary stages that you have to do them before you start writing anything. And it means you have to know your material. First of all, when I say know to your material, it means you have read already all the literature that should be covered. And I'm not going to tell you how to search for this. This is somewhere else. But you know already everything that you should have read. You made yourself the notes in the way that works for you. Some people, they make notes on the articles themselves, some in the PDF, some have notes, doesn't matter, but you know the material. Let's assume that this part is covered fully. In addition, if you're writing an introduction, you should know already what you have in terms of results. You should have analyze your results, you know what worked, what didn't work, what will go into the paper, because the introduction has to be connected, obviously, to what you did at the end. We'll come back to it later, that you might have had plans for lots of interesting things that didn't work, so you're not going to talk about them in the introduction. If they didn't work, you have to quietly put your tail between your legs and shove them to the side. Okay. So let's say that you've read all the material, you know where you're going. The question is, what from all the abundance of material that you've read should go in? I mean, you've read hundreds of articles maybe. You cannot put all of them in the introduction. You have to make it concise and to the point. So this is how you start, by doing something that is called in the business management brainstorming. Brainstorming is usually, in the normal way of addressing this word, si'ur mochin in Hebrew. People gather together in a room, sitting in a circle, and they have to think about something, where the company is going in the future, or where to develop our organization, or whatever. And so each person is throwing an idea, and somebody is writing it on the blackboard, on the whiteboard, or on the computer, and everything goes. Everybody says what they're thinking without judgment, and then they start discussing the different ideas. So this is brainstorming, and we have to do, the recommendation by this method is to start by brainstorming without other people, just ourselves. Then we'll have to take a short pause, And eventually we will build the connection between the different parts that we threw in the brainstorming, the connection and the order. So let's see how this works. So the first stage is the brainstorming. We throw the first idea. We can take a big page, like an A3 page, and just write a little bubble and the first idea there. And then you can think about the second idea, everything that you think might be useful for the introduction. You've read so much material, and from this there are some points that you think are useful. So you write them, and then you write another one and another one until you have all your ideas that you think might go in. Might, they don't have to go, they might go in. And the very crucial point here is to not apply any judgment. If an idea came to your mind, that's it, you have to write it. You cannot say, nah, this doesn't fit, I'm not going to write it. No, it came to your mind, you have to write it. Because this is the essence of creativity, no judgment. If you start thinking, yes, but no, I'm not sure, not only it will take you much longer, but you will start eventually blocking your creativity. Creativity comes only from the freedom to throw ideas, irresponsible, but you just throw them. Afterwards, they'll go away. Don't worry. If they don't need to be there, they will go away. But you have to have them in front of you on this page. Then you take your pause, meaning that once you think that you squeezed your brain and all your ideas that potentially could go for this introduction that you're writing are there, then you give it another day or two. Maybe a new idea will come to add to this. So give it a day, give it 2 days until you say, okay, now nothing additional will come out from this. Then you start making the connections and determining the order. So the connection, they can come from, let's say that you think that idea 7 is a good place to start the story. So you start from there and you feel that going to idea 10 is actually a good flow, and from there you could go to idea 9, 4, 2, and then you see that idea 1 connects very nicely to idea 8 and to idea 5. Let's say that at idea 5, you have 2 options. One of them is either to flow to idea 6 or to flow to idea 7. This is not allowed. You cannot have 2 branches going from one idea because we are talking about a flow, and the flow has to go in one direction. It doesn't matter which one, the logical one, but it cannot split in the middle. So you have to think which one is better. So let's say that you think that idea 6 is actually not as good as a continuation from idea 5. So you delete this arrow and you leave only the arrow to idea 7. And suddenly you realize that your story started from a different place. Now it starts from idea 1 and it goes in a nice circle and covers most of your ideas. And then you have to think, what about idea 6 and idea 3? I don't see them connected. And then you think maybe they shouldn't be connected. Maybe they are the ideas that have to be dropped away because not everything that came to your mind at the beginning needs to be there. So you don't erase them completely, you just make an X on them and you continue forward. So once you have this, let's call it a bubble diagram, okay? So once you have this bubble diagram, you can continue to move ahead with this. But I have to explain that what you were doing here, the connections with the arrows, is really crucial and important. And there's not one way to do it. There are hundreds of ways. If you have like 20, 30, sometimes 40 bubbles like this, imagine how many different options there are to connect them. So you have to really think carefully what you see is an optimal way to connect and not to get stuck on the first path that came to your mind. This is the worst enemy, to think the first one that came is probably, that's the way I have to go. No, be open. This is the area for creativity to allow you to go to many different directions, possible directions. So my preference whenever I have to write a bubble diagram is to do it on a piece of paper. Sometimes I connect 2 pieces of paper to get the size of an A3. And to draw, the bubbles can be written by pen, but definitely the arrows, I draw them by pencil so that if I'm not happy with a certain direction, I can easily erase them and continue to totally different directions. Some of my students, they prefer to do it on computers, and that's okay too. They either use PowerPoint, as I showed you in the previous slide, or you can do the same in Word, Microsoft Word, or there are some dedicated programs for what is called mind mapping. One of them is Miro, a free mind mapping program, and there are others. I didn't investigate this direction, but some of my students like them. So doesn't matter which method you do, the idea is that you must have the flexibility and ability to change those arrows and direct them from one path to another if needed. At this stage, remember that the main issue is to not suppress creativity, and judgment is the worst enemy of creativity. So once we have all the arrows and we are happy with the direction, now we want to get, we should get the approval of our supervisor or collaborator, whoever is involved in this study that we are doing. And this is a very crucial point. This is the only way that these collaborators can really check all the options. If you come to them with a paper that is already written, and then they have to go over it and edit it, then they can edit the English, they can edit the idea, they can fix things that are not precisely described or bad, language ambiguous and so on. But it is really difficult to get out of the path that you have written and say, now let's do it completely different. Not only it's difficult in terms of the mind of doing it, but it is difficult to say, wow, now this poor student or poor postdoc worked on this for maybe a month or two, came up with this paper, and now I'm going to trash all his work and tell him to do it completely different because I have a different idea. Many times this is what happens with supervisors, and it's very sad. This is why I suggest not to come to the collaborators or supervisors when the product is already ready, because then they cannot think creatively themselves. They are stuck in the path that you determined. So it's like going in a canyon. The more they move forward in your introduction, they are enslaved by it. They cannot, it's much more difficult to start and jump out of this canyon and climb out of this and to totally different direction. So in order not to lead them into a one-track minded, but to give them also the opportunity for creativity, you should come with them with the bubble diagram, because the bubble diagram, they see all your ideas. They see even the ideas that you cancel. Maybe they'll say, you know, actually, I think that idea 3 is very good to add here. Let's see if we can find a good place for it. Or maybe they think that if you just change the order of the arrows, then you have a more interesting story. After all, we are here about telling a story to the reader who's going to read our product, whatever that is. So there are many ways how to start and where to go, and it is very possible that we have ignored an option to do it much more interesting. And so this is the role of the collaborators. When they see the bubble diagram, they have the freedom, they have the flexibility, like you had when you drew the arrows. And this is much easier than coming to a finished product and trying to get out of the initial path. Okay, so now finally you are going to start writing. All this was just preparation before the actual writing. And it's going to be easy, right? Because you have the bubble diagram. After you've agreed on the direction and on the order with your collaborators, then it's a roadmap. You know exactly where to go, what to do. You don't have to rethink it every step that you are moving, just stick to it. I'm not saying that you never ever change anything that you decided to do in the bubble diagram, but initially try to stick to it because you've spent a lot of time thinking. Hopefully you've done that. You spent a lot of time thinking about the directions, and you've consulted with important people in the project, and now you don't want to waste time every time again and again to rethink your roadmap. So stick to it. You might think that now that you have a roadmap, then it's easy. There's no need for creativity. I'm just going to follow the order, right, of the roadmap. Wrong. Because you have just a heading, just a short sentence that represents a whole idea. And you have to put life into these headings. Each bubble can be a paragraph, it can be 2 paragraphs. So you have to develop it, and how you develop it, there's still a lot of room for different options. And this is, again, where you need your creativity. So where do people get stuck, apart from how to start? Okay, you have to overcome this problem because you have the roadmap. They get stuck in how they continue. So they start writing, and then they get stuck, and they start writing, and then get stuck. Usually, the people who get stuck, the problem is they write a sentence and then erase 2, and write another sentence and then erase another half, and keep editing and polishing it and improving and checking the dictionary and checking articles. And all this is blocking them, and eventually they're making no real progress. And it's not fun. It's not fun when you sit all the time and you feel that you're dwelling, like you are in a swamp, and you cannot make any progress because all the time you write, you erase, you write, you correct, you write, you consult with the literature, and you're stuck. And moreover, the problem is that there is no creativity in this process because you are so busy correcting yourself and fixing yourself. And remember what we said before, judgment kills creativity. Now, I'm not talking at this stage about external judgment like reviewers or even your supervisor. I'm talking about your own judgment. This is the most dangerous killer of creativity at this stage. So what is the solution? How to allow the door open for your creative idea? The solution is to not erase anything, to not edit at this stage anything, exactly like at the stage of the brainstorming. So let me show you an example how I would write without erasing. Okay, so I start writing and I type whatever ideas I have in my mind, and if I have spelling mistake, I don't go back to fix them. And I'm not questioning my direction. I have the roadmap in front of me. I'm just following the roadmap, filling in each subject and writing. And definitely, I'm not trying to fix anything. And so sometimes it happens that after you wrote a whole sentence, you're not happy with this. So what do? You don't go delete it or anything. No, you're not allowed to delete. You skip to a new line, and then you start writing in the new line your new ideas. You can stop in the middle of the sentence, in the middle of a word, but the new paragraph is there, and afterwards you do the cleaning. But the idea is to keep your line of thought that is free. And this is the essence of this method of creative writing, that it really, if you do it properly, it can give you a feeling of high, really, from writing according to these principles. It may look strange at the beginning, but really at a certain stage and at a certain speed of your thoughts that are coming, suddenly you realize that this is really something very special that is happening. And these 2 buttons that we have on the keyboard, the backspace and the delete, they are our biggest enemies at this stage. Because imagine that you take a sentence, you've just written it, and you start polishing and cleaning it and checking in the dictionary, maybe you have another word that fits better, and so on. Not only that you spend a lot of time on this at this stage, maybe you're going to delete the whole sentence later. Once you see the whole structure of the paragraph, you will decide that this is totally unnecessary and in the wrong direction. So don't waste your time on it. But it's not only a question of not wasting your time, it is also a question of not blocking your creativity. This is the issue here. Because every time that you start deleting, this is the beginning of blocking your creativity by this backspace or delete. Now I want to take you back to my personal story. After I took this workshop of 2 days, I was fascinated. I really could see from the exercises that we did throughout the workshop how efficient it is. And I started writing the next chapter of my thesis according to the principles, bubble diagram and all this. And I tried to write as described here, writing in a method that is going to be free from judgment. But I just couldn't stop my hands from going to the backspace and delete. It was so frustrating. I knew the theory. I knew how it should work. I believed what they told me. I just couldn't stop it. It was so frustrating. And eventually I went to the manual of the computer. I had an old computer then, and I found in the manual a method that you can give different roles to different keys. So if you want, you can take the key K and give it the role of printing a U, okay? And so having understood this process, I gave a different role to the backspace and to the delete. Instead of backspace, it does nothing. And when you press delete, it does nothing. So I would write, start typing, and then I make an arrow. My intuitive writing would go back, 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 back. It doesn't do anything because I cancel the option of doing backspace. And the same, I keep writing up, want to delete something, delete, 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 delete. Doesn't help, doesn't work. After a while, your mind starts absorbing the process that you are not using these keywords. I mean, this is a bit extreme, I have to admit. I think that most of the people that I teach them this method don't have that problem that I really couldn't help myself from all the time going backwards and delete. But I want to show you the principle that once I got this idea of deleting the role of the backspace and delete, suddenly the writing becomes something totally different. And this is really the how you get the high from the writing. I have to tell you that often when I heard interviews with poets and with writers of prose and so on, and I would hear them telling me how they feel obsessed by something and the writing comes not from their own brain, but it comes from somewhere else, I listen to this and say, yeah, right. And I couldn't understand, I couldn't identify with this feeling. However, once you get to this stage of writing creatively, without judgment, without deleting, without editing, you will be amazed. Suddenly, ideas comes to your brain and you have no clue how they came. You don't remember, you say, wow, I never thought about it. How did it come all of a sudden? It's a great idea. And you keep using it and you keep writing it because you released all judgment and you let your mind fly to all possible directions. And as you write, and you do it quickly, and you really are with high adrenaline, and you get amazing ideas without any chemicals, just from writing creatively. So when you write your paragraph, I want to give you a few tips about the way they should be structured. You have to remember that your reviewers, whether it is reviewers, your supervisor, or the reviewers of an article or whatever, your proposal, they are busy people. They are very busy people. They don't have really much time to spare for any of the tasks, many tasks that they have. So many reviewers, they have to employ a method of fast reading. When people learn to do fast reading, they have to skip from time to time in sections that are not so important. I hope that you do this too. I mean, you're reading hundreds of articles. I hope you didn't really read them from the first word to the last one, yeah, right? So you go over an article, you look at this and say, okay, this I understand the point, not important, this is not important. Okay, here I have something really fascinating, that's what I need. You read it attentively, you make a few notes to yourself, and then you keep going. So you have sections that you read intensively and some sections that you skip very shallowly. So this is also what your reviewers are going to do with your own work. I know it's sad to think about it. You spend so much time thinking about each word and they might skip whole paragraphs sometimes. So you need to help them. You need to let them know exactly what's going to happen in the next paragraph, and then they can make their judgment. So you have to adjust your writing to the way people read material nowadays. So the first sentence in each paragraph, it's like a little abstract of this paragraph. So it should give, if possible, I'm not saying that it's always possible, but if possible, try to give it the feeling of what's going to happen in the rest of the paragraph. Also, the last sentence of the paragraph, it has a role. If possible, try to connect it to the next paragraph. Make the transition from this paragraph to the other one smoother, easier to read on these busy people. So let's take a little example. We have here, of course, you don't have to read the whole paragraph. Just look at the blue sentence. It's the opening sentence of the second paragraph. It says, several non-mutually exclusive hypotheses about the benefits of sociality have been suggested. This short sentence tells you exactly what's going to follow in the paragraph, right? Because you know there should be several hypotheses, not only one, several, and they're non-mutually exclusive, and they're going to talk about benefits of sociality. So there should be several hypotheses, and if you're interested in this, you're going to read them. And in the last sentence of the previous paragraph, the sentence says, individuals might be ecologically constrained to remain in groups despite the costs. And this is a connection, actually, to the next sentence, because if you're talking about costs and still animals remain in groups, despite of the costs, there must be some benefits. And this is exactly the opening of the next sentence. So these are little secrets that makes it easier for the reader to read. After you've written your very confused paragraph, remember that we didn't delete anything, we didn't fix anything, so if you look at it, it looks like a chaos. But now it's time to edit. After you've completed writing this section, this is the time to edit, and this is the time to move step by step, to use all your logical and rational and sequential and judgment and everything, to delete parts or the sentences that you stopped in the middle, to correct the language, to look at a thesaurus, to replace words, fix typos, and so on. Don't expect at this stage to feel this elated feeling that I told you about in the previous stage. No, it's not going to be like this because you are not employing your creativity, and that's okay. There is not much creativity in this stage, but you've done your creativity already. It's built in either in your bubble diagram, first stage one of creativity, and the second in writing these paragraph. Your creativity already contributed there, and now you can be technical. So it is not elated feeling, but at least there's no reason to get stuck because you're editing, and we're good at editing. It's just one step after the other, and with no time, we realize our introduction or discussion or whatever we wrote are ready, or at least the first draft is ready. So now I want to touch a small side issue of what is the right order to write your sections. And if you look at any manuscript, usually they have the structure of, you have the abstract, you have the introduction, you have the goals, then the method, the results, the discussion, and the bibliography. Now, I believe that all of you or at least most of you, know already the secret that nobody ever writes the sections in this order. Nobody starts with the abstract, introduction, goal, method, results. There are other orders that makes more sense. And I suggest to start with the easy parts. The easy parts being the results and the methods, because they're very technical. The results, you've collected your data. We said already before that you don't start writing the article until you know what you have in hand from all your research that you've done. You've done your statistics, so you know which one of your results is statistically significant, which one is worth presenting to the world, and which one, what can you do? They're not contributing much to your ideas. So you have to toss them aside. So writing the results usually is fairly technical, easy, and shouldn't bring any block. I mean, you may be blocked because you don't know how to analyze something statistically, but this you have to consult with somebody who has more experience, your supervisor, your collaborator, or some statistician in the department or elsewhere. So, but there's no reason to be blocked by creativity, because you've done the experiment. Now let us see what came out of them, okay? So these are the results. After you've written your results and you decided which elements of the data that you collected are going to go into this article and not into another article, or not to the trash, then you know, okay, these are my results. Now I have to write the methods for these specific results. Because if there were some results that you tossed aside, or you decided to put them in a different chapter or different paper, then obviously you don't want to write the methods for these results, right? So after you've listed all your results and written the little text that should go between them, then you can write the method in the same order of your result, more or less, in some logical order that exists. Now, I want to tell you that this is not the only version that one can think of. There are people who think that you should first write the method and then write the results. The reason is, I hear that writing the method is even easier because it's very technical. It's really, you probably know the instrument that you've used, you know how many times you went out to the field, you know what you did in the lab, you probably have protocols of what you did. Hopefully you have documentation of everything that you did. So you just have to put it in writing, but there's no need for any creative, original ideas. Basically, you have to tell what you did in an ordered and clear way. So there's no reason to really get stuck on it. So some people suggest that you start with the method because this is maybe the easiest to write. And the risk is, and this is why I'm not so happy from this order, that the risk is that only when you get to the results, you'll discover that some elements are not going to go into this chapter or this article, and then you wasted your time writing and detailing the methods. So it's not a very big problem. It's a bit of waste of time, but there's no element here of killing creativity like before. So my personal preference to writing order is to start with results, then the method, as I told you before. Then I think the goals should be clarified. And obviously you had goals before you started your research. We all know that you had written the research proposal before. So you knew your goals, but now you have to reevaluate them, because after you know your results, you know that maybe some of your goals were aspiration to something that you did not manage to do it. So now you are back to reality, and you leave in your goals only those parts that you know came out eventually successful, you're proud of them, and you want to put them in this article. And then you write according to this preference, to write the introduction, then the discussion that closes whatever you opened in the introduction, left some open directions. Now in the discussion, you're supposed to close them with your conclusion, and eventually you have the bibliography and the abstract. Now, there are people who would see it differently, and it's okay. There are many different versions. So as I said, results and method could be exchanged, no big damage would call there. Introduction and discussion, also people sometimes have a preference to write first the discussion and then the introduction, okay. And some people prefer to write the bibliography after the abstract. I don't see why it's important because anyway, abstract do not cite bibliography, but if you want, there's no big damage in it. So this is another option of doing all these little exchanges. But you will notice that the goals have to be defined somewhere before the introduction and the discussion, because they are supposed to be taken into consideration, especially in the introduction and eventually also in the discussion, because if you set up some goals and you don't discuss them in the discussion, people are saying, hey, you promised that you're going to do something and now you're not telling us about what you think about it. So the goals have to be set first, and then you can write your introduction, discussion, and so on. Let me give you a tip about introduction and goals. And we all know that introduction is meant to describe what has been done before by other people and giving us also the background that we need, or the reader needs to know something, what you're going to talk about. They need to understand sometimes the context and they need to know some fact. So first of all, in the olden days, when I was a student and even later on when I was a young faculty member, there was still a habit of writing introduction that was so long and so tedious, as if people feel they have to prove to the reader that they have read all those hundreds of articles, and so they have to cite them all and so on. And it is so difficult to read it that you are going to lose your readers midway in such an introduction. But nowadays, the habit is not to write such complicated and elongated introductions. Editors don't like it when you take too many pages from the journal. And so you have to think very careful about choosing the right part that are most relevant and most important. So you are going to show to the world and to the reviewers and to your colleagues that you have read all these hundreds of articles, not by citing them all, but by choosing the right ones. The fact that you're writing a short introduction doesn't mean that you don't read all these hundreds of articles. You keep reading them, but you have to think carefully what is really important to put. And this is what you do at the stage of the bubble diagram. So you create your introduction, and as you write it, you have to start pulling some invisible threads, like the silk of a spider that is not seen by the reader, that you are gradually leading him to one point. This is the climax of the introduction, and this is the info gap. It's an information gap where people suddenly realize, because you led them there, they didn't know it ahead of time, but you led them to this. You can call it trap. It's not a trap, it's reality, but you want to show them, look, people have done that and they have written all this and they were doing wonderful work. However, because they did not check this and this and this, then we don't know how to evaluate what they did. And even though they were fine people, we should all lose sleep over this because we don't know what's really happening there. But don't worry, I'm here. My goals are to fix a problem. After you read my article or you give me the grant, then you can go and rest to sleep peacefully because I'm going to solve this information gap. So let me give you a brief example of a theoretical introduction. Let's say that you'd start in the introduction, it's about feeding in horses. So you write that previous studies describe the daily grazing schedule of horses living in nature, and let's say that some people found seasonal variation and other people found geographic variation between different places, and they did wonderful work, and really There is no complaint about the quality of the work. However, all of these people, let's say that they only looked during daytime, because this is the time that it's easy to do observation on animals. So they were sitting there with videotapes or with binoculars or cameras and took their notes during daytime. So the info gap is here. We don't know what these animals are doing at night. We only know that some animals, especially grazers, but not only, they feed at night at least as much as they feed during the day. So by knowing what they're doing during the day, we have no clue what happens during the night. So don't write it in these languages they use, that their studies are meaningless. Nobody will be happy to read this. But basically you are giving the impression that what they did is fine, but without understanding what's happening at night, we don't really know what's going on. Because imagine that in a certain season, horses are found to eat less. Maybe it's not because they really eat less. Maybe it is because they shifted their eating hours from daytime to nighttime. And without measuring the behavior at night, as you're suggesting to do, we don't know. We cannot evaluate the energy balance of a typical horse from this group. This is why people cannot rest until you do your study. And you will solve this problem, for example, by using night scopes or whatever, infrared cameras and so on. So the idea is to point the reader throughout the introduction to lead towards the information gap. And then from the information gap, immediately when people are sitting, really? This is really terrible. Then you say, no worries, I'm going to solve it, count on me. Now the problem is, I don't know in many other disciplines, but at least in my disciplines of ecology, where we study specific species as an example, as a model species, often people write very nice ideas, they point out to the information gap, and then they lose all the momentum. They were really going to the top, and from there they could, this expression in Hebrew, להרים להנחתה. So it's really the example where you can hit the ball harsh, but at this point, instead of reaching the goal, suddenly they say, I'm going to study this on my animals, and my animals do this and do that, and they live this and this, all kind of technical information that maybe is needed to understand the whole story, but it's the wrong place, it's the worst place, because it opens a gap between the information gap, which is the place where you accumulate the energy, and the goal where you are hitting down on everybody and you're convincing them that your work is important. So if you need to write something like this about your model system or the model species, find somewhere else. Sometimes we put it in the method, sometimes we hint to it somewhere in the introduction. You have to think, each study it's a different story, but the worst place is to block or to separate between the info gap and the goals. So we were talking about where do people get stuck. We know how to avoid getting stuck at the beginning. We know how to avoid getting stuck when they continue by writing creatively. How do we end? So the best end for writing is to writing the abstract. The abstract is really something that you can write only after you are sure that all the other parts are final, nothing is going to go in or out from there, it's finalized. Only then you write the abstract. And the right abstract, we all know, needs to attract the reader. From reading a few lines, you want to convince them to dive into the full paper. So it has to have a bit of each part, a little bit of the introduction, a little bit of the method, a bit of results, and a little bit of the conclusion. I suggest to avoid the use of something sometimes people write at the end of the abstract, the implications of this and this will be discussed. What are you doing? You are promising us that it will be discussed? No, discuss it here. Write your most important implication that you found so that we evaluate and we think, okay, yes, that's nice, this implication. I want to read more about it, not just promising, yes, I will discuss it in the conclusion of my text. If it's in the abstract, it's more convincing. I want to quote another sentence that I heard from many times from one of my supervisors during my master's at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Yuda Werner, and he always used to write to his students, the article cannot shorten the abstract. It's the other way round. And the idea was that sometimes people will write in the abstract 2 or 3 sentences, but in the actual paper, they don't mention it at all, or they mention it in one short sentence. The abstract is only a short version of the text. So if something is not worth expanding in the body of the article, then it shouldn't be expanded in the abstract. It's bad practice. So I promised you that towards the end, I'm going to help you to understand how to prevent writer's block. Writer's block is a phenomenon that is known both for people who are writing prose or writing poetry, but also for scientists, and it can be very, very frustrating. However, I already told you how to prevent the writer's block. All the principles that I mentioned are going to prevent it. The first stage, the brainstorming, it's going to be your roadmap, so you cannot be blocked at this stage. Then you get approval on the roadmap, so nobody can come to you after you've developed your paragraph and tell you, no, you have to start from the beginning. And then you say, what, after I spent so much time on this, I have to start, I don't know how to start again. It cannot happen now because you got approval on the roadmap from your supervisor, collaborators, whoever is needs to give the approval. So this assures that you are not going to be in troubles and you're not going to get blocked at this stage. And then you have the creative writing, that if you do it properly, you do not edit while you write, then you really can get it going fast and in a creative way and in a way that it's really captivating, and you will see that you will look different when people look at you, because you will be so happy that all the ideas are streaming to you just from the fact that you are not judging yourself. And then we talked about editing stage and about the order of section. The last 2 parts, I don't think there's great innovations in this, but I think the 3 parts that are marked in red are the things that I heard during this workshop, and I thought that they are really the stronger forces that move this method forward. And a last tip is that don't lose the momentum. They said it at this workshop, and only later I realized how correct they are. Try, once you're settling to start writing something, keep writing every day, even if just a few lines, even just a paragraph, a few ideas, because the longer you get far from what you wrote before, then you lose the momentum. You say, yeah, I'm busy, I had a busy day, I cannot do it today, and then tomorrow it becomes that you're even busier, and you find all kinds of excuses not to go back to the process of writing that maybe is a bit of a struggle to you, and the obstacle become bigger and bigger until you see monster in everything that you are looking. But actually, if you would keep the momentum and write every day a little bit, you would be in this direction to success, and you will not feel that you are too far from it to go back to it. Often I hear my students say, no, I need my desk clean from all my other chores before I start writing. It's wrong, because you are not going to get, at least at your advanced stages, the more advanced stage you are in, you will realize that you have many more multitasking to do. And so it's better not to wait for this day where your desk is clear completely, but to put aside time every day to move forward, and keep the creative stage going. What were the reactions of my students? Over many generations of my students, I told them this. I never presented it until now in a presentation like this, but I gave them 4 pages that I wrote with the summary of this workshop. Well, I can tell you that even though they are my students, not everyone followed the exact details that I provided. So often, instead of writing bubbles with arrows, people would make a list of ideas, one after the other. And no, this is not the same. This is taking the idea in the totally wrong direction, because the bubbles and the arrows are the epicenter of creativeness and of thinking outside of the box. But making a list, one below the other, you are canalizing yourself in a deep canyon, and you cannot get out of it, let alone your supervisor cannot get out of it. You have to write it in a spread method and be creative about how you connect it. The second mistake that some of them did, they wrote the bubble, all right, and they developed the bubbles into the paragraph, but they didn't come to discuss with me at the bubble stage. And then I see the article or the discussion or the introduction that is written, and I say, it doesn't feel good to me. Show me your bubbles. And then they come to me with the bubbles, and I say, why didn't you show me the bubbles at the stage where you wrote them? Because then I could tell you, why don't we change this arrow from here to here, from there to there, add this idea, and we have a wonderful story. You have a wonderful story in your fingertips. So it's good to come and discuss this direction of your paper at the bubble stage. And eventually I had some students who could not refrain from editing while writing. They would come and tell me, I'm trying and I cannot do it. I understand that, because I was exactly at this stage when I was writing my PhD. I told you what I did, and software that can do it now for you, very simple apps that can give different roles to buttons on your keyboard. So if you really have this problem that you cannot contain yourself from typing and editing immediately, I suggest you do those tricks in order to prevent you from editing while you're writing, in order to feel creative. However, not all my students did those problems that I mentioned here. Many of them did follow the method, and many of them really thanked me for this, and I meet them often afterwards. They left Ben-Gurion University, and still they're doing whatever their career led them to do, and they're enjoying it, they're using it, and it helps them a lot. And I will be glad to answer questions now. And let me tell you that I will also be glad to hear your success stories, how you tried this method and you felt suddenly that you can fly till the moon with this. Or if you tried it all and it didn't work very well for you, please tell me also. Maybe we can think what was the problem. And now I'll be glad to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Amos. I suggest that you will take a few minutes and go over the questions and remarks that were written already. There are many of them from the beginning. And if you want to speak, anyone who wants to ask question in person is welcome to ask. And I will close the people who are speaking now while you are doing that.
Okay, so I'm starting from the first comments from the beginning. One comment about Edinburgh. I'm not sure that I understand.
It's not for you. Go on.
Okay, so somebody, Yuval, is asking, but we do erase ideas, so we do judge, don't we? Yes, we have to judge, but the question is when we do the judgments. That's what I said before at the beginning. We have to use a creative part at the beginning. Let us fly with our crazy ideas, and then afterwards, after they've emerged from somewhere in our creative parts of the brain that maybe we didn't even know that we have creativity. You know, I would consider myself as I could never be an artist. I cannot see myself with creativity. However, in this process, when you follow this, it works wonderfully, but you have to do it first. First, you are creative, and then you go to the state where you delete things and you have judgment. Of course, you must have judgment. Okay, more messages.
Anyone wants to enter and to ask in person? Just do.
Okay, so somebody is writing here, Charlene is writing, judgment happens when connecting, not when shooting ideas. It is true that when you are writing your arrows, there is an element of judgment, but at this stage, your mind should be still fresh and flexible. This is why you are writing it in pencil. So as you start putting the arrows, you're allowed to erase them and think about it and give it a few days to think how to connect. It's not a simple task to make the connection because, as I said, there are many, many options. And you have to evaluate each one of them. So sometimes you write them, you want to think about it, and then you want to look, sometimes consult with somebody, and then you change them. So it is, you must have at some point a judgment after all, but before locking on something, you have the freedom to change the arrows around. Okay, so Macy wrote, it's a great method, but the one error from a bubble rules seems too strict for me. The project and paper with different structures, right? When we have one central concept and develop various aspects of this. So obviously, as you write later, clear enough, I need to put it in the linear order finally, but I do really need to do it at the very beginning? No. At the beginning, you throw the ideas. This is the idea that the bubbles, they can spread all over the page. You don't have to put ideas that are connected next to each other. But once you start connecting with the arrows, you can have it for a while. You can still keep a few directions. But remember, when we read an article, we start from the top of the page and we go below, and then we turn the page to somewhere else. So it is linear. You cannot escape from it. So after all your tweaking and after all your experimentation, as you write, you have to put it in a linear order eventually. So you start with arrows in many directions, but by the time that you think, okay, my bubble diagram is ready to show to my collaborators, then it would be good to have it linear in some way. Of course, you can have question marks. You can consult with your supervisor and say, hey, I was hesitating whether to go from here to there or from there to here. And this is certainly legitimate. Writing is thinking. Oftentimes, I need to write parts of the draft before I even understand the ideas with the bubbles. Okay, definitely I acknowledge that different people have different ways of thinking. I can see it when I compare myself to some of my students and colleagues. Different people think differently. So the problem is that if you write, I also sometimes get ideas and I quickly write them somewhere because I don't want to forget them. And once I look at them, and then I come up with writing the final bubble diagram. So it's okay to write something before, but not to commit yourself to a certain order and to limit yourself to a one-track mind. This is the idea that you want to write a few ideas from here to there. It's like a big bubble, basically, what you're suggesting. That's fine. But the order or the story that you are telling should be with the freedom to connect them in many ways. Okay, I thought I was the only one that suffered this way. Now everybody is suffering from it. If it is done, this is from Jonas, if it's done thoroughly, you already mapped all topics in the first place. So what would be the benefit to not structure it based on your following working process? I guess it's an answer to a previous comment. And as I said, people may differ when do they go to the linear stage or not, but eventually we all agree that it has to be linear because this is how a paper is structured. Writing without editing is very common in creative writing. I have yet to try for research, but did word runs during NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Months, with rules such as writing an hour without using. Oh, great. Yes, I have to say that the people there at the workshop, they said that even though it was given for medical staff, doctors and so on, at the hospital, they say that it's equally valid also for people who are writing prose and poetry and so on. So you're describing that writing 600 words without editing anything. Amazing. Great to hear that people are doing it. Can we receive the presentation afterwards? Yes, I can give you a PDF version and I'll send it to you, David, and you're going to post it in Mavarim.
Sure, thank you.
Jonas. No, Marcy is answering Jonas, sure, but I mean that linear mapping is not the only viable option. You might prefer a hierarchy or a solar system structure. Anything goes if it helps you get a clear conceptual argumentative structure. It is true that you can think like a solar system. However, eventually your paper is linear. You cannot escape from this. Unless you are painting something and then you can describe it in like a solar system. But in writing, you have page 1, page 2, page 3. You cannot escape from it. Kindly explain the first step of starting with the introduction. I thought this was the last chapter we should write. Shouldn't we start with our finding? Okay, I actually said that you have to start writing the results first, then the discussion, and then you go to the introduction and the discussion. So I agree with Ariel.
Amos, why won't we give somebody to the option to ask? I see from the last one, I see David and Nick and Luda. So it will be more interactive. Do you want to ask? Anyone wants to come in? David? Not necessarily.
All right.
Please.
So I asked that I would like to join Braha's question above mine regarding tips for referencing. Can you please offer tips for keeping the flow while referring to the existing literature? It can be quite a time-consuming and effort-consuming process, as we all know. Thank you in advance.
You mean, let me clarify that I understand the question. You mean that as you write, you want to address the references, or when you, I mean, at the bubble stage or at the writing paragraph? What is, where are you asking?
Well, I think at both of these stages prominently because, well, at least in my area, I'm a humanities person. We do have to plan our writing using the literature very extensively from the very beginning, actually.
Yes, definitely. Also in my discipline, the introduction and the discussion are full of references. Also the methods, sometimes they have to refer to previous work. So if you have key references in your mind that you know the names of the author, then you can quickly write them, even if you don't remember the name or the name of the second author, or you don't remember the year, you just write sometimes just what you remember. Sometimes you don't remember which references is suitable. You remember that somebody wrote something because we said already that you read the literature and you know it. You may not remember all the references, but so you can write there, you know, parentheses and write in there refs, and ... and later you're going to fill them in during the stage where you work systematically on your on the editing. This is the stage to fill in the details of the references. But basically the hope is that you have already in your mind at the stage of writing the bubble diagram, and you are in between dispersed in your bubbles, there are things that refer to the literature, yes?
All right, thanks.
More questions? Anyone wants to ask?
Yes, I also have a question. What about the process of revising the paper? Let's say I have a reviewer's feedback, and sometimes they ask to change something something small or add a paragraph, but when I start working on that, I see that it's problematic to make a connection with previous paragraphs. I don't know, maybe you can just tell how I can adjust this method to the revising process, because I feel that the revising process is the most difficult. The writing is very difficult there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
the
you.
revising process is basically a part of the editing, only with judgments from somebody else, not only from you. And what can we do? Sometimes these people are determining the fate of our article or our thesis, our chapter, our proposal. And so we have to usually take most of the suggestions or part of the suggestion that we get. And it's not so easy to combine it with the creative method. Only if it's really asking you to rewrite the introduction, then you can go back to your bubble diagram and think, okay, how could I rewrite it in a different ways to adjust to the comments. But if the reviewer had some specific comment to add this or to add that, this is part of the editing stage, and it is the logical process step by step. And you have to struggle between your inner feeling that sometimes may not be exactly what the reviewers thought. So you don't want to tell him go to hell because it won't lead you anywhere. But you don't have to completely lose your belief. So sometimes you have to be creative a little bit about how to tell the reviewer, yes, I understand what you're saying, but here and this, so I took it into consideration and changed part of what you said. It's a little art. I think there was a talk a couple of weeks ago exactly about that, which I didn't have time to watch, but I sent my students to watch it.
Yeah, I see there's other people who wants to come in.
I see one question here that is interesting in the writing. Amy wrote, for multilingual people who are mainly writing in the second or third language, can switching to mother tongue in writing the idea in the first stage help the flow of creativity? I don't know. I believe that this is an individual experience of people. I know that during my master, I started to write all my scientific notes and ideas and summaries of references that I read in English. Even though it was not very easy for me to do it, but I accepted that it's only for me, so I can write with spelling mistake. I don't have to spend time writing in proper English, but it made my life so much easier because basically by writing in Hebrew, you are translating from, let's say that English, I don't know if Hebrew is your main language, but let's assume that you're writing in English, and your mother tongue is Hebrew, right? So if you write your notes in Hebrew, you are throwing yourself away from the terminology, from the sentences that you have absorbed when you read everything in English. So I recommend to my students to try and write notes for themselves in English, regardless of the mistakes, Not all of my students listen to me. What can I do? Each person is different, and I accept that maybe for them it's too difficult, although I believe that they should write in English.
And thanks. And can I add a bit on my question? Because, of course, there are some languages in which they do not fully express all the things that we want to say, for example, in our mother tongue. So in that sense, especially for some disciplines like social science, law, humanities, what would you recommend? Still thinking in the target language and not sticking to mother tongue, even though the target language is not clearly specifying what we want to say? Thanks.
As I said, I believe that it's better to stick to the target language, even though it will not be polished, and even though it, because this is just the beginning of the ideas. You just write the general idea, and I believe that it's leading you closer to the right track. And eventually you will discover, as I discovered, that you start thinking in that target language. And it's much easier when you read articles. Usually it's in the target language, and so when you write, then it's connecting the reading and the writing without a mid person, which is your native language. So it's a struggle, but it's a useful struggle because it will become easier with time.
Thank you, Mr. Forwinden.
Yes.
Yes,
hi. Hi.
Please.
Yeah, I had a question about the part that I found most inspiring when I write is writing the introduction, because it always reminds me what the big ideas are, why this is interesting to write about. And I realized that when I work on an article, I rewrite the introduction 1,000 times. And there comes a gap between what I set up to be doing in the article and what I actually end up doing with my results. And so the first part is always inspiring to write, but I'm kind of like blocked on the rest of the article. Do you have any advice on that?
Well, this is why I think that you have to write your introduction only after you've written your results, when you know where you are leading, you know what you succeeded in, and there's no use of wasting your time on writing beautiful introduction in directions that lead nowhere during this stage of your life. Maybe in the future you will do them, but for the moment you didn't manage to do it for some reason. Maybe it's definitely not your fault, but you cannot present it in the paper, so you don't want to write it in the introduction. So first have the results ready and prepared for your consideration, and then tailor the introduction so that you choose only those elements that are needed, that the reader needs to know just for these results that you are presenting.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Charles and Susanna.
If I may.
Yeah, please.
Since you were talking about the results, this is exactly where I'm stuck at the moment. I did, I'm really happy that I joined this meeting today, because I am stuck. And I'm stuck right where you're saying that we should start from the results. And I'm still working on my findings. I know where I'm heading. I know I have, a target idea where I'm heading in the discussion, like my final results. But right now, I'm still working on the blocks that are building my discussion. And I really appreciate if you have any idea what should we do, because there is a way that I can, sometimes if I use a certain methodology or something, I'll get one way of things, and if I'll cut it a different way, I'll ask a different question, I'll get another way. So how to untangle that, if you have a good idea?
Well, I think that it's, although it may happen involuntarily, that thinking about the discussion while you're still analyzing your data, I think this is not the proper order of doing things in research. I think that you've done research, you've done a study, you have to analyze the data objectively. This is a part of the results. It is analyzing them in a way that nobody can argue about it. So this is the objectivity that there is in the results. Once you've analyzed this, regardless of your goals or your thought ahead of time, then you put them on a page of paper. And I'm not saying that you have to put everything in. Maybe some ideas you don't want to put them because they're out of the way or they're breaking the rules or whatever. I don't know why you don't want them, but still you should have them in front of you when you evaluate what do I have in my hands, because I'm assuming that you are in a stage where you're not going already to collect more data about or do more research about this topic. Maybe on other topics, that's fine. But on this topic that you're sitting to write an article, hopefully you are not collecting new data. So this is a finite set of data. Analyze it the best that you can, most objectively, put everything on the table and think what should go into this paper, what should go into another paper. And then try to think how to connect them and what's the story and so on.
Yes, thank you. Susanna?
Hi, thank you so much for your lecture. I have a question on research proposals. Do you have any tips? Precisely because we don't have results and we need to be extra convincing.
Yes, so here basically in a research proposal, you have an introduction that has exactly the same principle that I mentioned before, only more important because you're trying to sell your research proposal. I don't know if your research proposal is just for your committee, it's not so severe, but sometimes it is to get money or to get a job or whatever. So research proposal can be really very important. So you have to lead the reader by presenting the proper information to lead to the information gap, and then to say, yes, I'm going to close this information gap. I am amazed how my students, I teach some of my courses, at the end of the course, I ask them to, instead of an exam, to write a research proposal because I want to train them in writing research proposals. So I have several courses where people write research proposal, and the most difficult part that they have is to justify why it's needed. And very often they fall into the trap of saying, nobody did it, so I'm going to do it. This is not an argument, because if nobody did it, maybe there was a reason. Maybe it's stupid to do it. Maybe it's boring. Maybe it's useless. Maybe it's just a little bit more of the same of somebody else. So the fact that people didn't do something is not a reason to do it. We have to acknowledge that there are millions of things that people haven't done, and we cannot justify just doing all of them. So once you put this as a justification, you have to show that it is important to do this study, because without doing it, something is not complete in our knowledge, in our understanding of whatever you are studying. I believe that it's true for any discipline that you have to point at parts that are not complete without your study. Okay, then you have the introduction, you have the goals. Then often you write, at least in my discipline, we write hypotheses and predictions, but it varies between disciplines. And then we go into the methodology that has to be precise enough to show that you've researched the topic, that you've read enough material that you can make intelligent choices between the different methods. So it gives it gives the reviewers the confidence that, okay, she knows what she's talking about. I can see she's citing the right people, and she's writing the top of the articles that are doing this methodology, so she knows what she's doing. And towards the end, if you have preliminary data, this is like results. And it's very good to be proud of what you did, because preliminary data can convince the reviewers that you know what you're doing and you have success. You can prove that you can do it. It's not just promises. you've collected data already in this and this and this, small samples, you cannot maybe analyze them statistically, fine, but it shows that you are on a good track, something that they want to be confident that they are not wasting their money on something that is just a gamble or something.
Thank you. Charles Rabb, do you want to, Professor,
Yes.
do you want to enter?
Yes, thank
Professor
you.
Rabb from Edinburgh.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed your talk, Amos, and I learned a lot from it. But I put a question in the chat thing, and now since you mentioned different disciplines, it gives me a chance to say what I wrote. I'm not sure whether you have explored how far what you're talking about can be transferred to other disciplines where the approaches of the natural sciences are not necessarily appropriate or possible. I'm thinking here of fields within the social sciences, the political sciences, the arts and humanities, and other areas where there isn't a sense where you have a base of data and findings from it, and then you can do a methodical, march from A to the conclusion in terms of analyzing the findings and discussing. There are all kinds of academic kinds of writing that people do. And while I would like to think that some of your suggestions are translatable, I wonder whether you've pushed the limits of the envelope and seen whether social scientists, for example, are actually finding it useful.
I cannot tell you from experience. I now have students from the social sciences where we're trying to see how politics can be combined in my studies of sociality in horses, and to try and see how we can merge these two topics and learn from each other.
Yes,
so I get exposed a little bit to a different style of how of people from the social sciences write introductions and so on. And it is a little bit maybe similar to reviews in our discipline, where we don't have results, but you read a lot of articles that people did and you try to synthesize your take from all the studies of others. Is this a bit similar to what you're talking about?
Yes. Now, of course, I mean, there are many kinds of social sciences. Some of them do approximate to the natural science thing, where you may have hypotheses, where you might have a database, where you collect a sample, etc., and then you can analyze it and so forth. But an awful lot of academic writing is not of that kind. So I can appreciate how your methods can translate to the kinds of social sciences where you do approximate a natural science paradigm.
I wouldn't like to comment on something I'm not familiar with.
I always
I really don't know exactly how people from these disciplines write the studies. I don't read much of this, and so maybe I shouldn't say if it can be extended or not.
It would be an interesting thing to try and find out, though. It's interesting.
I can say from my experience that it seems very reasonable to apply in the social science. This is my take from the talk. And I also would like to say that game theory seems perfect for me to the animal relations more than human relations. So this is a kind of the theory side is, and this is my comments. But let's go on for others.
May I just ask a question?
Yes, please.
So I had a thought on this when your comment came up, Charles. So thanks for bringing it up, because for me, in a practical sense, maybe for the social science, the results and the discussion can often be blurred into their own section. So perhaps it's more practically about the look as a whole at the different sections of an article that might be the main difference in process.
Obviously, certain disciplines will have their own structures, and as you describe it, obviously it's different from what we are used to. But I think that you can try and translate what we said here about the creativity, trying to reach as a creative stage before you go into the steps. Or maybe you would have to modify a little what I said, you know, it's not engraved in rocks. But the main theme was to allow a stage of creativity, to map your ideas with this bubble diagram, and then to try and write creatively without judgment, even if your section is a combination of results and discussion. Still, you can apply the principles of what I said here, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. More questions? I see David Artsuker raised his hand. Please, David. Yes, you are muted.
So now I'm mute my microphone. Yes, well, first of all, Mr. Bouskila, thank you very much for your presentation. But a bit in line of the other remarks that have been made. Yes, I'm working on management science, humanities paper, and indeed I find it a bit difficult to. I usually, as I have said in the chat, I usually work a bit differently. I often find it convenient to start with a very preliminary abstract, and to me that it gives a signal. Would this point I'm making? It's not. It would be different with you have really an empirical study. But then, would this wash? Would it make sense? And of course, then you start working on the entire paper. Of course, you're going to alternatively change your abstract a lot. But to me, it puts me a bit on track. Or is this a sensible direction you are going? That's one remark I want to make. And the other remark, yes.
Let's do one at a time. Let's do. I have a short memory, so let's deal with the first comment, and then I'll
right.
the second. So regarding what you suggested here, that you prefer to start writing like a little abstract of the idea, I would say that to keep your creativity going on, I would write this abstract not as a paragraph, but as a bubble diagram of where you think the article is going, and let your mind fly on it, and maybe get some connection that you didn't think about them just by jotting down the ideas and then connecting them freely without not allowing the first idea that came to your mind to dictate the rest of it. So you can write your ideas, but just write them as a bubble. Then this is going to be like your abstract. And you can manipulate it very easily. Once the abstract is written, you are trapped in it. Okay, now to your second question.
The second, you said, of course, don't backspace and delete. But in my experience, I can just write so in such a wild manner that I sometimes do not properly recognize what I've written. There's so many spelling mistakes. So what I sometimes do, I sometimes benefit from going to a line, clearing out what have you actually written, and then you say, oh, that is the line you were making, and it limits me a bit. That's a problem, of course. But then again, it becomes clear what I have written. So sometimes I got a bit. My creativity gets a bit wild. So I experience some. It gives me some grip. Just edit the sentence, and I just know that's really what you've written, and that's really the point you have made. Then you can really reconsider what you've written, and then because else you may, in not all instances, just go lost. Is that good?
Okay, this indeed sounds like a problem, and because if you say that this is the only way that you can recognize what you have written,
sometimes.
So, yeah, sometimes. Maybe you can slow down a little bit the writing and not, writing in a frenzy so that it can be recognizable. But I still think there's a benefit in writing and not editing immediately because it blocks creativity.
Yeah, that's easy.
But, it reminds me when I was writing my PhD, I went to one of my supervisors in Davis, and at that time there was no word and the track changes, so he would write his comments handwritten on a piece of paper on the printed pages, and then I would come to him with 60% of the comments that I couldn't understand what he had written. He said, I can't recognize it either. I don't know what I've written. Yeah. But he told me, go to this and this secretary, she can interpret my handwriting. She was able to interpret it. I had sessions with her.
So slow down. Let's see this. Don't backspace, but slow down. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Last question from Clara. It's in the text, or you want to speak out? Amos, you can have a look at the text, but Clara can come in as well.
There's so many shops.
In the last comment, really.
It's what?
Our microphone isn't working, so the question is like this. This is the last question. What about
okay.
She's following Rani.
I found. Thank you so much for this great presentation. My micro is not working. To join Rani's question, what about using your method when we've already started writing? Is it too late to employ your method and get creative when we've started the article chapter without using bubbles? Well, sometimes I am forced to do it when students come to me with an article. I told you that I'm asking them not to, but not all students obey what I'm asking them. So sometimes they come to me with an introduction, and I know that I'm trapped in the idea that the student wrote, and it's really difficult for me to emerge out of it to totally different directions. And sometimes I have the feeling that it's really a trap. It's not the right direction. The stories could be much stronger and much better. And then I pause. I say, okay, I am going to write the bubble from the introduction. So what did the student write here actually? So I'm putting the ideas that he or she wrote in a text, I'm putting them in bubbles without connecting them, not in the same order as the student wrote them. So I just throw them on the page and allow myself to say, is there something missing? Then I can add them, and then I can say, is there a different way to connect them to make a better story? And so this is a lot of work, but it saves sometimes the introduction of somebody that could be very clogged and missing the main point. And so don't despair. I think that even if you wrote a lot, you can still evaluate what you wrote if you think that, I mean, if you're really happy with it and everybody is happy, maybe you should continue with this. But if you think that it could get improved, try to translate it to translate it to a bubble diagram.
Yes. Thank you very much, Amos. It was excellent. You could see the long interests and thank you for the people in writing. It was a pleasure to have you, and we are expecting to have you again with us in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much.